You ever hear a story so wild that it makes you stop mid-bite of your steak and just think? One of those tales that sounds like some frontier tall tale, but the deeper you dig, the more you start to wonder, what if? What if this isn't just some fever dream of old men telling stories around a fire? What if there's truth in it? Now, if you've been around the cryptid world long enough, you know that nearly every Native American tribe in North America has some variation of a Sasquatch legend. Some see them as watchers, forest spirits, ancient guardians. Others, they see them as something much worse. The Choctaw, they had a word for them, champe, and they didn't just whisper about them in hushed voices. They went to war with them. Yeah, you heard that right. War. Today, we're diving into the actual accounts of the Choctaw people battling these massive, hairy, man-like creatures in the thick, swampy forests of what's now Mississippi and Louisiana. No blurry trail cam photos, no questionable YouTube videos of dudes running around in gorilla suits. This is something else entirely. We'll break this one down into 3 sections. First, the legends. What the Choctaw people actually said about these beings, how they described them, and why they considered them an enemy, not just some nuisance lurking in the trees. Second, we'll look at whether there's any actual evidence to support this, archaeological finds, oral history, and cryptid research that might back up these war stories. And last, we'll go deep into the rabbit hole. The idea that these creatures weren't just flesh and blood. Could they have been something more? Something darker? So buckle up, because today we're going full tilt into the wilderness of history, myth, and the things that don't like to stay in the past. Now, before we get started, take a second to like, subscribe, and share this episode. The more we dig into these stories, the more people need to hear them. All right, let's talk about the war no history book ever told you about. So, here we are. We've walked through the legends, sifted through the evidence, and cracked open the bigger question, the one no one really wants to ask out loud. What really happened in those deep, ancient forests? Were the Choctaw fighting off some undiscovered species, a relic of an older time, some massive predator that got pushed to the edge of extinction? Or were they up against something more sinister? Something that didn't just lurk in the trees, but in the space between? I don't know about you, but the more I dig into this, the more I start to feel like this story isn't finished. That whatever the Champa are, they didn't just vanish. They moved. They adapted. They learned how to stay hidden just enough to keep the skeptics comfortable, but still close enough to remind those who are willing to listen that they're still out there. And if the Choctaw were willing to fight them, to hunt them down at the risk of losing their own warriors, that tells me something important. They weren't just afraid. They saw these things as a threat. And maybe, just maybe, they were right. If you enjoyed this episode of Broadcasting Seeds, make sure to like, share, and review the podcast. The more we talk about this stuff, the harder it becomes for the truth to stay buried. If you've got thoughts, theories, or even your own stories, I want to hear them. Reach out, because this conversation, it's far from over. Until next time, keep your eyes on the trees, and if you hear something moving out there in the dark, maybe, just maybe, you should listen. All right, so let's set the stage It's somewhere in the deep forests of what we now call Mississippi, maybe Louisiana. Thick, swampy air, the sound of insects buzzing so loud it feels like the trees are alive. And somewhere out there, past the tree line, something else is moving. The Choctaw people knew these forests like the backs of their hands. They were warriors, skilled hunters, and survivors in an unforgiving land. But despite all that, there was something that shook even them to their core: the shampoo. Now, if you're expecting your typical, oh, it's just a big smelly forest dweller that keeps to itself kind of Bigfoot legend, you're in for a surprise. The Choctaw didn't just see these creatures as elusive cryptids or misunderstood beasts. No, these things were monsters. What were the shampoo? The shampoo weren't just lurking in the woods, minding their business, munching on berries, or whatever people think Bigfoot does. No, they were raiders, predators, nighttime terrors that would sneak into Choctaw villages under the cover of darkness. And what did they want? Food? Sure. Livestock? Sometimes. But according to legend, they weren't just stealing from the Choctaw. They were taking people, women, children, warriors who wandered too far from the fire at night. Some were never seen again. Others came back changed, if they came back at all. And that was a line the Choctaw weren't about to let these things cross. The war begins. So here's where things get even crazier. The Choctaw weren't just hiding in their huts, praying these things would go away. They fought back. Tribal leaders organized hunting parties, not for deer, not for enemy warriors, but for shampoo. Now imagine this: skilled warriors, painted for battle, armed with bows, spears, and clubs, tracking these massive hairy creatures into the deepest parts of the wilderness. The stories say that these battles weren't just quick skirmishes either. The shampoo fought back. They were stronger, faster, and had an almost supernatural ability to disappear into the trees. Some Choctaw war bands never returned from these hunts, and the ones who did, they brought back stories of eyes glowing in the dark, of things that shouldn't be able to move that fast, of inhuman screams that echoed through the woods for hours after the fight was over. The turning point. The legends say that after years of bloodshed, the Choctaw finally pushed the shampoo back, drove them deep into the swamps, into the hills where few dared to go. Some say they killed them off entirely. Others, they say the shampoo are still out there waiting, watching. And here's the kicker. These weren't just isolated stories from one or two tribes. Other Native American nations across the country have eerily similar legends. The Cherokee had their own battles with the stone giants. The Iroquois feared the Janoskwa, a giant rock-skinned being that would smash its victims into the ground. So what does that tell us? Either this was one of the most widespread and persistent campfire stories of all time, or maybe, just maybe, there's something out there in the woods that doesn't want us to know it exists. All right, so we've got the legends, stories passed down through generations, epic battles between man and something other. But legends are just that, right? Stories? Well, maybe not. Because as much as history likes to sweep this kind of thing under the rug, there are physical clues, evidence that suggests the Choctaw War with Bigfoot wasn't just a myth, but something that left an actual footprint in history. Strange remains and unusual skeletons. You don't have to dig too deep into old reports to start seeing a pattern, literally. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, newspapers and archaeological reports began surfacing about giant skeletons being discovered in burial mounds across the Mississippi River Valley. And we're not talking about tall guys who drank too much milk. We're talking 8, 9, even 10-foot tall skeletal remains with oddly shaped skulls, massive jawbones, and in some cases, double rows of teeth, a trait commonly associated with many Native American myths about ancient giants. Now, here's where things get weird. Every time these finds made the news, every time some farmer stumbled on a skeleton that should not exist, the remains would mysteriously disappear, shipped off to the Smithsonian or some private collection never to be seen again. Sound familiar? The Smithsonian itself even admitted decades later that in the early 1900s there was a movement to suppress or outright destroy evidence that didn't fit the mainstream historical narrative, meaning that if the Choctaw actually did battle a race of large humanoid creatures, the physical proof of that fight may have been quietly erased from history. Oral histories as a form of truth. Now, skeptics will say, oh, come on, these are just stories. People exaggerate. But here's the thing about Native American oral traditions. They don't work like European fairy tales or campfire stories. In most tribes, oral history was as sacred as scripture. Elders passed it down precisely, ensuring that details were preserved for generations. The Choctaw weren't making up bedtime stories to scare their kids. These were warnings, a historical record of something their people actually encountered. And if that's the case, then it means the Shampoo were more than just cryptid folklore. They were a real threat that needed to be fought back. Modern Bigfoot sightings in Choctaw territory. Now, fast forward to today. You might think, okay, even if there was something out there, wouldn't they be long gone? Not so fast. Mississippi and Louisiana still rank among the top states for modern Bigfoot sightings. And we're not talking about some guy who had one too many beers in the woods and mistook a bear for something spooky. Hunters, hikers, entire families, people who have nothing to gain from making this stuff up. They report seeing the same things the Choctaw described centuries ago: massive hair-covered figures, glowing eyes in the dark, guttural screams that don't match any known animal. And here's the clincher. Many of these sightings happen right near old Native American mound sites, the same locations where these supposed battles took place. So what does that mean? Either Bigfoot is just a really good hider, or whatever really happened between the Choctaw and the Shampoo centuries ago never actually ended. All right, so we've covered the legends, the battles, and even the eerie evidence that suggests something real went down between the Choctaw and these massive creatures. But here's where things take a hard left turn into the truly strange. Because if we're being honest, the idea of Bigfoot as just an undiscovered primate, some kind of lost evolutionary offshoot, doesn't fully explain the weirdness that surrounds these encounters. And that weirdness, it's everywhere. The problem with the just an animal theory. Let's assume for a second that Bigfoot is just some large flesh and blood undiscovered primate, a North American cousin of the orangutan or gorilla. That would make sense, right? Big animals hide all the time. Look at mountain lions. You can live your whole life in cougar country and never see one. But there's a problem. Actually, a few problems. No bones, no bodies, no roadkill. If these things are just animals, where are the dead ones? Why has no one stumbled on a decomposed Sasquatch carcass in the woods? Trackers can't track them. Native American hunters and modern-day survivalists alike have reported that when tracking a Sasquatch, the footprints just stop, as if the creature just disappeared into thin air. They mess with electronics. Some of the most credible Bigfoot researchers say that when they enter an area of known Sasquatch activity, their cameras, drones, and GPS devices start acting up. Batteries drain. Signals go haywire. That's not normal for just some big, dumb ape. Now here's where things get even stranger. The paranormal connection. Many tribes, including the Choctaw, didn't just see these creatures as animals. They saw them as spirits, as entities that could shift between worlds, vanish when needed, and move in ways that defied the laws of nature. Sound crazy? Maybe. But then you start hearing the stories. Hunters claiming to shoot at Bigfoot only for the bullets to pass through like they were hitting nothing. Witnesses describing a sudden shift in the air, static, like before a lightning strike, right before a Sasquatch appears. Some researchers even claim that these beings can cloak, blending into their surroundings like something out of science fiction. And then there's the one that really makes people uncomfortable, the UFO connection. Yeah, I said it. There are a staggering number of reports, both modern and ancient, of Bigfoot being seen right after strange lights in the sky. Even old tribal legends describe the Champay as coming from above, descending into the forest as if they weren't just from this world, but another. Now, I'm not saying Sasquatch is an alien, but I am saying that something about them doesn't fit neatly into the big undiscovered monkey box. Spiritual warfare and the ancient battle still happening. If you've been listening to Broadcasting Seeds for a while, you know that I don't think all of this stuff is just random. There's a pattern. And that pattern? It starts looking a lot less like cryptozoology and a lot more like spiritual warfare. What if the Choctaw weren't just fighting flesh and blood enemies? What if they were battling something darker, something that wasn't just a natural predator, but a force that fed on fear, chaos, and destruction? Think about it. Why do so many of these stories talk about the Champay taking women and children? Why do so many cultures associate Sasquatch-like creatures with abductions, with shape-shifting, with supernatural power? What if this isn't about biological survival, but something older? A war between humanity and whatever lurks in the shadows, one that's been going on since the beginning. And if that's true, then maybe the Choctaw never won the war. Maybe they just fought hard enough to push the enemy back. For now.
Yeah, I got bad thoughts that make my mind scared. Hold me hostage and they don't fight fair. Who gon' pray for me and wipe all my tears? Who gon' save me if you not right here? Move this darkness and make my sight clear. Take me your way cause I don't like here. Ghosts of my past, they feeling the night air. Wake me up, I'm trapped in my nightmares. Trapped in my nightmares. Drowning, I'm off the deep end. Apparitions of all my demons. All my thoughts are committing treason. All alone, who gon' hear me screaming? Manifestations of my fears, regrets that stretched out for light years. Can almost touch the light, homie, it's right there. Body free but trapped in my nightmares. Wake me up, don't let me drown. All the lights are